Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, so I want you to completely forget all those Hollywood stereotypes you've seen of mall cops riding around on Segways. Today, we're going to unpack a truly fascinating and honestly highly misunderstood world, the fundamentals of unarmed private security. Whether you're interacting with security professionals at your local shopping mall, a concert venue, or even just your office building, the realities of their day-to-day job are likely way different from what you might assume. So, get ready to see the world of private security through a completely new lens.
You know, there's this really common misconception that security work is literally just putting on a uniform and standing around. But the truth, it's so much more than that. Effective security work is grounded in incredibly strict training standards and intense accountability, totally driven by the mandate of pursuing excellence in training and accountability for public safety professionals. I mean, it requires a sharp mind, a really deep understanding of the law, and absolutely fine-tuned communication skills.
And to give you the most accurate and grounded perspective possible on all this, we aren't just guessing here. We're working directly from official state-vetted training modules. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the standards set by the Oregon Department of Public Safety Standards and Training, or DPSST. Seeing that official seal means you're getting the exact, verified curriculum that real professionals have to master to do their jobs legally and effectively.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's a quick look at our roadmap for this explainer. First, the private security professional. Second, legal authority and boundaries. Third, tactical communication and awareness. Fourth, the fundamentals of patrol. And fifth, managing scenes and emergencies.
Starting off with Section 1, the private security professional. I want you to place yourself directly in the shoes of a security professional for just a second. Imagine you're assigned to protect this huge, bustling property. What's your actual job? Well, you're there for observing and reporting unlawful activity, preventing or detecting theft, and controlling access to the premises. Notice what isn't heavily emphasized there? Right, fighting crime or chasing down bad guys. The true primary responsibilities of a security professional are observation and prevention. Basically, you're a highly trained deterrent and a professional witness.
Which brings us nicely to Section 2, legal authority and boundaries.
Understanding your boundaries is absolutely crucial here because overstepping doesn't just mean getting fired, it can mean serious legal trouble. So, the big question, do private security professionals have police powers? The firm absolute answer is no. No way. They do not. In general, a private security professional really has no more legal authority than any other private citizen. The authority they do wield, that's simply the extended authority of the property owner who actually hired them. So, they can avoid the rules of the property, like asking someone to leave, but again, they are not the police.
Now, what's really interesting about this is that because security professionals aren't police, any arrest they make is technically a citizen's arrest. And under Oregon law, this requires a remarkably strict legal threshold. You can only make a citizen's arrest if a crime was actually committed right in your presence and you have probable cause. That means having a substantial objective basis to believe that specific person committed the offense. You absolutely cannot just arrest someone based on a gut feeling or hearsay.
And the stakes for getting that wrong, they are incredibly high. If a security professional makes a bad arrest or uses force when they really shouldn't have, they aren't just facing potential criminal charges from the government under criminal law. Actually, it's worse than that. They open themselves and their entire company up to civil liability lawsuits. Those are private disputes for damages. So a simple misunderstanding can very quickly snowball into a devastating tort claim for false imprisonment, assault, or battery.
Here's another really fascinating legal quirk. What happens if a police officer is struggling with a suspect on the property? Well, there is a massive legal difference between an officer commanding your help, which is called directed use of force, versus you just sort of jumping in unasked, which is voluntary. If you're directed by an officer to assist, the law provides a justification that shields you from criminal liability if you use reasonable physical force. But if you simply volunteer, you do not get that same specific statutory protection, so you have to be super careful.
Let's move on to Section 3, tactical communication and awareness.
Because the legal risks of physical force are literally off the charts, a security professional's absolute best and most frequently used weapon is never physical force, it's their words. This is what we call tactical communication, the strategic use of verbal and nonverbal messages to accomplish one very specific goal, and that is voluntary compliance. The goal is always de-escalation. By managing your tone, maintaining an open posture, and actually actively listening, you're trying to guide an emotional or angry person toward calming down and following the property rules on their own, without anyone ever having to lay a hand on them.
To actually pull that off effectively, security professionals use this sort of mental engine for problem solving known as the SARA model. First, you scan the environment to spot any potential problems. Next, you analyze the underlying conditions, like what's really happening here. Then you respond based on that analysis, choosing the safest and most effective tactic possible. And finally, you assess the impact of your response. Did it work? What could we do better next time? This four-step loop is constantly running in the back of a good professional's mind.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 4, the fundamentals of patrol.
So what does this actually look like day to day? Well, being on patrol means being prepared and choosing the right method for your specific environment. You might be on foot, maybe on a bicycle, or in a vehicle. And each of these has its own pros and cons, right? Vehicle patrols allow you to cover massive amounts of ground very quickly, which is perfect for huge industrial complexes. But foot or bicycle patrols, they allow for a much greater level of citizen interaction and sensory awareness. You can hear, see, and even smell things on a foot patrol that you would completely miss if you were just rolling by inside a car.
And this brilliantly illustrates what happens when interacting closely with the public, especially when you're controlling access. You rely on hands-on tactics, like the TLC approach for ID checks. First, touch the ID to literally feel for physical alterations. Things like bumps, peeling lamination, or tiny slits. Then, look closely at the photo and the person's facial features. You want to ignore easily changed things like hair color. Finally, check for authenticity, looking for proper state seals and official signatures to make sure it's the real deal.
Which brings us to our final section. Section 5, Managing Scenes and Emergencies.
But what happens when that routine patrol is just completely shattered? When words fail and a sudden emergency breaks out? Whether it's a devastating medical crisis, a severe traffic collision on the property, or even a fire, the focus shifts entirely from prevention to immediate, structured crisis response. At this point, panicking is simply not an option.
The very first thing that must be established is an absolute hierarchy of emergency response. Securing life safety is always, without exception, the first priority. Protecting property is strictly the second priority. Think about it. If you've got a damaged building and a severely injured person, that property damage is completely ignored until the risk to human life is managed and stabilized. It's a non-negotiable rule.
And managing that risk almost always requires calling in public safety. A security professional is highly trained to stay calm, avoid using slang, and provide clear details fast. Where is the emergency? What exactly is happening? When did it start? Who is involved? Why did it occur? And critically, this is a big one. Are there any weapons present? Providing this succinct, accurate information ensures the right help arrives exactly when it's needed.
This leads right into a singular, absolutely vital rule, especially when we're talking about fire safety. The principle is clear. Call 911 before taking any action. Remember, you are a trained observer, not a firefighter. You should never try to play the hero before alerting public safety. The absolute most valuable thing a security professional can do is sound the alarm, evacuate the area, and be totally ready to guide the fire department the second they arrive on scene. Well, that brings us to our final thought for today. We've seen that a private security professional's most powerful tool isn't a weapon. It's their highly trained ability to observe, assess, and communicate. They actively scan their environment while, let's be honest, most of us just passively exist in it. So, I leave you with this question to ponder. If observation is really that powerful, what are you failing to notice in your own daily surroundings? Stay curious, stay alert, and thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.